repeat this process over and over and over. But what you really want to do is you want to go as fast as you can without a capacitor, for the simple fact is you want to put a lot of this radiant energy to the source.
Do it! Do it!
Do it.
Do it!
Do it.
Do it! Do it!
Who is doing it?
Do it!
Do it.
All of it!
Do it.
Come on! Do it now!
Now we do the rest.
Oh, these cookies!
Put that cookie down! Now!
You want to repeat this process over and over and over. But what you really want to do is you want to go as fast as you can without a capacitor, for the simple fact is you want to put a lot of this radiant energy to the source. You want to repeat this process over and over and over. But what you really want to do is you want to go as fast as you can without a capacitor, for the simple fact is you want to put a lot of this radiant energy to the source. repeat this process over and over and over. But what you really want to do is you want to go as fast as you can without a capacitor, for the simple fact is you want to put a lot of this radiant energy to the source. process over and over and over. But what you really want to do is you want to go as fast as you can without a capacitor, for the simple fact is you want to put a lot of this radiant energy to the source. you want to repeat this process over and over and over. But what you really want to do is you want to go as fast as you can without a capacitor, for the simple fact is you want to put a lot of this radiant energy to the source.
Come on. Do it. Do it.
Do it. Do it. Do it. Do it.
Do it.
Who is doing it? Do it. Do it.
All of it.
Do it.
Come on. Do it now.
Now we do the rest.
You want to repeat this process over and over and over. But what you really want to do is you want to go as fast as you can without a capacitor, for the simple fact is you want to put a lot of this radiant energy to the source. you want to repeat this process over and over and over. But what you really want to do is you want to go as fast as you can without a capacitor, for the simple fact is you want to put a lot of this radiant energy to the source. you want to repeat this process over and over and over. But what you really want to do is you want to go as fast as you can without a capacitor, for the simple fact is you want to put a lot of this radiant energy to the source.
Come on. Do it. Do it.
Do it. Do it. Do it. Do it.
Do it.
Who is doing it? Do it. Do it.
All of it.
Do it.
Come on. Do it now.
Now we do the rest.
Oh, these cookies!
Put that cookie down now.
You want to repeat this process over and over and over. But what you really want to do is you want to go as fast as you can without a capacitor, for the simple fact is you want to put a lot of this radiant energy to the source. You want to repeat this process over and over and over. But what you really want to do is you want to go as fast as you can without a capacitor, for the simple fact is you want to put a lot of this radiant energy to the source. process over and over and over. But what you really want to do is you want to go as fast as you can without a capacitor, for the simple fact is you want to put a lot of this radiant energy to the source. repeat this process over and over and over. But what you really want to do is you want to go as fast as you can without a capacitor, for the simple fact is you want to put a lot of this radiant energy to the source. You want to repeat this process over and over and over. But what you really want to do is you want to go as fast as you can without a capacitor, for the simple fact is you want to put a lot of this radiant energy to the source.
Do it! Do it!
Do it. Do it. Do it. Do it.
Do it!
Who is doing it? Do it. Do it. All of it. Do it.
Come on! Do it now!
I will do the best.
You want to repeat this process over and over and over. But what you really want to do is you want to go as fast as you can without a capacitor, for the simple fact is you want to put a lot of this radiant energy to the source. You want to repeat this process over and over and over. But what you really want to do is you want to go as fast as you can without a capacitor, for the simple fact is you want to put a lot of this radiant energy to the source. You want to repeat this process over and over and over. But what you really want to do is you want to go as fast as you can without a capacitor, for the simple fact is you want to put a lot of this radiant energy to the source.
Testing. 1, 2.
Come on. Do it. Do it.
Do it. Do it. Do it. Do it.
Do it.
Who is doing it? Do it. Do it. All of it. Do it.
Come on. Do it now.
Testing. 1, 2.
Now we do the rest.
Testing. Okay. Here you see on the left commutator, on the right, magnetic solenoid, double course, double pole throw switch device created for the circuit in the center with the 2 batteries. And on the top left is just a demonstration of flyback and reverse polarity. And above the 2 batteries is another 2 batteries showing, the isolated portions of the circuit for better understanding on the viewer's side. Right now we're zooming into the main circuit. The right coil when it is red.
Oh, these cookies!
Put that cookie down now!
Anyway, red represents the battery charging the coil, and green represents the reverse flyback event into the opposite battery. This is based off the Bedini SSG or SG, whichever one you want to term it. It's the only thing different is it has an extra coil and an extra 3 switches. Bedini has 1 switch. He switches the negative side of the source to the coil. In this circuit, we are switching the negative and the positive sides of 2 sources. Both the batteries here act as sources and as loads, but they do not act as a source and a load at the same time. You will see the battery is red, then it's black, then it's green. That is controlled by the pulse cycle of the switching event to show you that they are not being loaded and charged at the same time. Even though it's happening fast, it's not at the same time. Zooming out now, we're going to zoom into, I'm not sure which, either one of the relays or the wheel. I'll come back in a minute.
You want to repeat this process over and over and over. But what you really want to do is you want to go as fast as you can without a capacitor, for the simple fact is you want to put a lot of this radiant energy to the source.
Now, in this system, you see just one battery on each side, providing power and receiving flyback each battery. But you can put more than one battery on each side in parallel, and I recommend you do that. Or you can put a large amp hour battery and make sure your coils are drawing minimal load as to not stress out the battery. In which case you don't need multiple batteries in parallel, but it still would probably be worth a try. This is still an open source, unbuilt prototype. So experimentation is what this is all about. Center have two switches on top of them. Now looks like we're coming into the rotor with the magnets are 180 degrees apart on the rotor, north facing out. You have two drive coils here. There is no trigger coil. It's just two drive coils, 90 degrees around the rotor. This way, one coil is triggered at a time in sequence. There's no need for a trigger winding when you're using the commutator on the bottom left or the magnetic reed device on the bottom right. Nonetheless, you can use a trigger winding on each of these two coils, positioned 90 degrees around the rotor, and have the one trigger switch two transistors to disconnect the positive and negative legs of the source, as you see in the bottom schematic with the two batteries.
You want to repeat this process over and over and over. But what you really want to do is you want to go as fast as you can without a capacitor, for the simple fact is you want to put a lot of this radiant energy to the source.
On the left, you have the commutator, double source, double pole throw. Same deal with the right side with the reed, magnetic reed. It's also double source, double pole. At any time, if you want to understand how the flyback reverses polarity and is captured into a battery, that can be shown on the top left, where you see the plus and minus at the bottom feeding a coil with the switch connected to the left side of the coil, switching the positive side of the coil. When the switch is opened or removed, the coil reverses polarity and a diode is placed in that direction, in that biasing into the positive terminal of the battery, a high voltage diode. You could apply that to a high voltage. Again, you have a choice between two switching mechanisms. The one on the bottom left is a commutator, and the one on the bottom right is a magnetic solenoid switch. Again, on the top left, you have the basic example. Oh, we're zooming in now to the bottom right. Here's the magnetic solenoid read. Showing here how to switch two source power supplies with two batteries into two different coils. One battery feeds one coil, the other battery feeds the other. When you energize the coil, it pushes the magnet away from the contacts. And that's the default state as you see it now, with contacting the bottom coil, but no power being received. Into the magnet, it pulls for the iron and stays in that position until you give it power, and then the coil's energized and pushes it away up to the other coil or up to the other contacts, which are then energizing the other coil to push it back in the other direction.
You want to repeat this process over and over and over. But what you really want to do is you want to go as fast as you can without a capacitor, for the simple fact is you want to put a lot of this radiant energy to the source.
And here you can see how the contacts are touching the two poles of the sources, plus and minus of each battery, turning the plus and minus out the other side of the coil. This can be, the frequency of this switching can be controlled through the force of your EMF field on those coils and the gapping between the core materials. But as soon as it's energized, it begins to switch. Again, on the top left, you have an example of a coil being energized. On the left side, positive, right side, negative. Now the switch is on the left side of that coil. The switch gets opened up. The coil reverses polarity. And then you can see a battery is drawn with a diode in the correct bias towards the positive terminal of the battery to capture the high voltage flyback. That is a big part of the Bedini concept of recycling the radiant energy into the charged battery. So what's being recycled is not the energy from the first battery, but the reverse polarity of that energy returned cycle of flyback is what we call it. commutator. The same two batteries shown in the circuit is indicated at the bottom. Same two coils are right above those batteries. And the wiring is the same as the circuit. And the large version seen in the center of this video. It just shows you how to use a commutator to switch the circuit in the center of this video. And you can see the commutator has two switch legs parallel to each other but isolated, to then switch the positive and the negative to the coil from the battery simultaneously. Then disconnect, coil flies back into the opposite battery, and the other side is triggered with the brass contacts for the other coil, and that's how that is working. These live streams are for Q&As, so anybody who's interested in doing this Bedini modification, basically this modification makes it so that you don't have to swap the batteries anymore, and the circuit automatically switches directions each cycle. I think that's the best way I can put it. And it's able to switch directions through the switching and the diodes, and the two coils help with all that.
You want to repeat this process over and over and over. But what you really want to do is you want to go as fast as you can without a capacitor, for the simple fact is you want to put a lot of this radiant energy to the source. you want to repeat this process over and over and over. But what you really want to do is you want to go as fast as you can without a capacitor, for the simple fact is you want to put a lot of this radiant energy to the source.
So, long before I heard him say that, this idea was bugging my head for about 2 years. It's like a bug eating away at my brain. An idea I couldn't get out. I had it stuck in there, per se. But yeah, that's what the circuit does, exactly what Bedini just says in that clip over and over again. As fast as you can. So it literally sends the flyback to the opposite battery, which is what the Bedini circuit does anyway. It takes charge from one battery and sends flyback to the opposite battery. Well, that's what this circuit does. It just flips the circuit around with the use of an extra coil and switches. And it flips the circuit around each switch event of the source to a coil. Simply energizing one coil at a time. And before you head over to energize the other coil, you handle the flyback event from the first coil you energized and send it to the battery that you're about to load onto the other coil. Just before you do load the other coil, the flyback had already been received into that battery. And then, whatever, a millisecond later, the battery gets loaded. But it doesn't happen at the same time. Technically speaking, not the same time. So adding batteries in parallel, you can see where that goes. This just shows you the isolated portions of the circuit for better clarification. Here you can see the right coil getting energized. Switch is open, flies back into the left battery. Left coil gets energized, switch is open. Coil flies back into the right battery. You can tie these two circuits together as long as you're switching both poles of each source. And when you do it that way, you have no interruptions or no issues. In the beginning of this circuit design, I was only switching one side of the battery, or the source, one pole, which is very much how the Bedini SG operates. It switches the negative pole of the battery to the coil. The positive charge from the battery to the coil is not being switched. It's directly connected. We are not doing that here. We are switching both sides of the inductor to its source, not one side. I prefer to use the magnetic reed solenoid on the right as opposed to the commutator on the left, because the commutator is limiting you to the RPMs of the shaft.
Come on. Do it. Do it.
Do it. Do it. Do it. Do it.
Do
Depending on
it.
what you're doing
Who's doing it? Do
with
it.
this
All of
system,
it.
it's an efficient
Come on.
DC
Do it
motor,
now.
highly efficient. Depending on what you're doing with it, if you're driving a load, driving a wheel, or like you need it for locomotion, then you might go with a commutator. If you're not trying to use current at all and just generate radiant energy with minimal current, then you want to switch as fast as you can. And the commutator really doesn't have a top RPM. It's limited in speed, unlike a magnetically controlled magnet, as seen in the bottom right. You can increase the RPMs of the magnetic solenoid reed device on the bottom right by using low carbon steel as your core, so that the flux does not stay around very long inside the core. Some good music. Let's see if we can't do this again. Left battery charges coil. Left battery charges left coil. The two switches above the left battery are closed. The two switches above the left battery now open, and the left coil flies back in reverse polarity. As you see, the plus is heading out the diode into the plus of the other battery. The other battery is highlighted in green. Next operation, Right battery closes its switches and charges the coil above it. Then the right battery opens its switches and the coil above it flies back into the left battery. You can see the plus side of the coil flying back through the diode into the plus terminal of the left battery. And the cycle repeats. Left battery charges left coil.
You want to repeat this process over and over and over. But what you really want to do is you want to go as fast as you can without a capacitor, for the simple fact is you want to put a lot of this radiant energy to the source.
Right now, zooming into the bottom right again, checking out the high frequency magnetic reed solenoid, switching two poles of a source on two different sources to two different coils. you would want to put a smaller magnet permanently attached to the core of each of the two coils there to oppose the field coming towards the coil, only enough so that when that magnet in the center gets close enough to the iron material, that the magnet you attach to it will keep it from bonding to the iron and have it stop in midair, if you know what I mean. That's the end goal with this relay. I did not put that in the animation. It's just too hard to explain in an animation. Sorry. But I'm going to put it in there verbally. You can put a smaller diameter, let's say 1/4 of the diameter of the core material, and attach the magnet, a neo per se, permanently to that core so that when your center magnet comes too close, it is stopped by repulsion. But you don't want that magnet that you're going to attach to that core to be so strong that it overcomes the power of the iron behind it and its attraction to the magnet in the center, in blue and red. And likewise, you would do the same thing on the other core, the same setup. So the other side does not smash into the iron, and it's sort of magnetically braked at a certain point. And again, you don't want that magnetic brake to overcome the power of the iron's attraction force to the magnet in the center in blue and red. When the coil is energized in red, it produces an alike field to the side of the magnet that's facing it and repels it away, thereby disconnecting the power from the source to the coil, and the coil no longer has a magnetic field to push the magnet away, so naturally the magnet will want to come back to the iron. But before it does come back to the iron, it had already gone in the other direction upwards to switch the other coil, and then that coil will turn on and assist the magnet in going back the other direction through the same repulsion force. It will produce an alike field to repel the field that's coming at it in the magnet in blue and red. These are live streams are posted for Q&As regarding this Vidini modification. For anybody who's interested in replicating it, it's open source, just like the Vidini SG. Well, Vidini says it wasn't really open source, but it got out, so he let it go and just kept it open source, I believe. So since this is open source and it's based off of something open source, I'm keeping it open source even though it's a modification of something that is open source. Honestly, patenting whatever, that's if you're trying to, use something to make money or whatever. This is just for experimentation, and yeah, it's not for profit. What else can you say? It's open source, yeah, I guess that's it. Nonetheless, being open source, I am the author of this modification of the Bedini SG. And I did come up with the idea and work out the bugs, and hopefully, it's unbuilt prototype, but I don't see any bugs because I have built the standard Bedini system and there are no bugs in that either. The only bug in the standard Bedini SG system is that if you're using lead acid batteries, if you have acid in your batteries, they're going to last as long as they would last with or without a pulse radiant charge, because that acid is not going to stop eating away at the lead, and that lead's going to get thinner and thinner, just like any other battery would that's under a standard charge. But if you're using new batteries that have a good 2 years of, or less, usually it's less than 2 years of a healthy run on a lead acid, because it's hydrochloric acid eating away at those batteries. Within the first year, you've already lost capacitance. You can't do experiments like that with hydrochloric acid. You can do it with lead plates or whatever material plate you want to use, but if you put hydrochloric acid over those plates, they're probably going to decay and fall apart just like the lead. So for anybody to say the pulse charge, the radiant charge on a lead acid battery is just destroying the lead acid battery, well, guess what? The lead acid battery, if it has hydrochloric acid in it, it's already destroying itself anyway. Nothing you do is going to change that. But from someone who's ran the experiment with new healthy batteries, I have seen no bugs. The new healthy battery charges right up and it goes under load. I have switched the batteries manually over and over again with no issues. The only issue I ever come across is the battery had hydrochloric acid in there and it's had its day and it's been eaten away. It's got no more lead left. So
you want to repeat this process over and over and over. But what you really want to do is you want to go as fast as you can without a capacitor, for the simple fact is you want to put a lot of this radiant energy to the source.
ultimately, if I were to keep an experiment like this running, low current draw on a coil, produce the maximum spike I can get with as minimal current as possible, I'd probably use a high impedance coil with a lot of turns and at least closer to 50 ohms on it, if not more. I mean, there's nothing wrong with bringing it up to 300 ohms and giving it a higher voltage forward pulse. But what I was getting to is I wouldn't be using lead acid. When I say lead acid, I'm saying hydrochloric acid. I would not be using lead HCl batteries, because the HCl is the bug in the circuit. It's the issue. It's the problem. It always will be the problem, no matter what kind of radiant charger you have. So that's why Bedini was doing his lead alum batteries, because the alum was just as good as, well, not as, it's close enough to as good as lead acid regarding holding a charge. But it still holds it holds about, probably about 60% of what lead acid would hold regarding a charge. But you're not eating away at your batteries. You're not destroying your batteries. The only thing that can happen to them is they dry up, lose water. but the lead alum crystals in there, or the alum, it's not lead, it's alum, aluminum. It's a spice that's got aluminum in it. I don't recommend using this on your food, but people do use it. If you want to eat aluminum, go ahead, eat alum spice. I don't see the point in eating aluminum, but yeah, anyway, you can use that spice to make these batteries, and they don't eat away at the lead. The aluminum does not corrode out the lead, and it's nano aluminum. It's like yeah. So you just get the powder, you get some distilled water, heat it up, turn it into a milky paste or a liquidy paste, so that it's liquid enough that you can pour it in the battery, and you're done. And then the water dries out of it, you lose charge, you put water back in it, and it holds charge just like it did brand new. The battery never decays. As far as I can tell, I've had them sitting around for over 10 years. They still work fine. They've never had any hydrochloric acid touching their plates. But every battery I've ever messed with, and that's close to 100, they had hydrochloric acid hit their plates at some point or another. I've removed most of the hydrochloric acid, tried to neutralize it. There's nothing you can do. Once that hydrochloric acid hits the lead, it's gone, dude. You just, you already started destroying the metal and its properties. You want to have lead plates that are nice and smooth and square and evenly shaped and smooth as possible. And whatever electrolyte you put in there, you don't want to have anything that's going to corrode those plates. So Bedini suggests getting dry cell batteries that have never seen any form of corrosive substances, and make your own electrolyte that's non-corrosive and put it in there. And that is the long run goal with this circuit, is to not use, these batteries here are not supposed to be lead acid batteries. They're not lead HCl batteries. They're either lead alum batteries, the way Bedini makes them, or if you want to make your own non-corrosive electrolyte that doesn't eat away at the lead plates, that is the idea behind this circuit. You're not going to see performance using hydrochloric acid with this circuit and in those batteries, for the reasons I stated earlier. You can argue with that all you want. Anyone that has done these experiments with lead hydrochloric acid batteries, whatever you saw go wrong for you was probably the hydrochloric acid was killing the battery. That's why you were not seeing the results you wanted. So you can use capacitors if you want. I'm not trying to capture the flyback with a capacitor. There's no need to with this circuit. You can probably put a capacitor to act as the load. I don't know. You can experiment with capacitors and expand on this with capacitors and see what you get on your readings. I'll probably end up doing that as well when I get my lab going. I would say for experimenting with capacitors, I would say using high frequency, low capacitance capacitors, maybe, picofarads or under 1 microfarad, for the purpose of, well, I'd say that would do the job of capturing the spike and somewhat converting it to a DC signal for charging the battery, or becoming a load. But Bedini's right, you want this radiant high voltage signal to send its signal over the 2 terminals of the battery. You want to attach the coil to the 2 terminals of the battery when it's being reverse flying back into the when its reverse polarity flyback event happens. When it's field collapse and it reverses polarity, you want to have that coil touching that those battery terminals at that point. You want to have that signal being generated over the battery, not that signal with amps behind it, but that signal alone, with minimal amps. It's not about the amps, it's about getting the high voltage signal over there without the amps, ideally, because if it had any amps, you're just creating destruction, to the battery. So it's already ideal. The flyback is already ideal. It already comes to you naturally without much amps. Even if you could just fill a coil up with amps. You can hit it with a DC pulse with a lot of amps to generate your flyback. And I don't know why, but something tells me you're not going to get a much higher voltage than if you created that same pulse with less amps, but using the same voltage. So how do you keep the amps from entering the coil when your volts go up? Well, that's simple. You add turns and you thin out the gauge. You increase the resistance of the coil so it doesn't allow the amps to get in. And when you do that, you have to increase the voltage because the volts are required to get through the higher resistance. So if you tune it right with the right amount of volts and the right amount of impedance on your coil, when I mean tuning, I mean in respect to your volts supply hitting the coil through the pulse. And that's your factor 1 for tuning, and your factor 2 for tuning is the impedance of the coil in respect to the volts you're giving it. So you would want to mess around with those two values to get the right, the maximum, flyback peak voltage you can get on the positive end of the flyback, as well as the negative. Whatever your peak-to-peak voltage is on that flyback, the maximum peak-to-peak you can get, without the signal getting dirty or whatever, or losing its clarity. And that would be the ideal impedance of a coil to be pulsed. So the impedance changes with the turns. If you're keeping the gauge the same, you add turns, the impedance goes up, and so does your flyback voltage peak. But if you don't want to use a whole lot of copper, let's say you started with a gauge 20 or a 30 or 28. 28 seems to be a good starting point, and you give a gauge 28 about 500 turns or whatever. I know about 2,200 feet or 2,300 feet of gauge 28 should get you about 370 ohms. And to get a magnetic field strong enough to turn a magnet, a ceramic magnet, with the right proportions to the coil, you need about 27 volts through that 370 ohms. I never got around to putting an oscilloscope on that flyback signal, but I'm pretty sure it had a very nice high voltage, probably around 27 volts. Could have been over 1,500 volt peak to peak on the flyback, I think, because I've seen with a 12 volt supply, not 27, 12 volt supply to a coil that was gauge 30, I think, and it had 1,500 turns. It had about 1,000 feet on it, and I think it was about the same ohms. But it had more turns, and as compared to this other coil, had less turns because it was a wider diameter coil. See, all that matters. Your turns, the diameter affects the turns you have. The less turns you have, the less voltage you're going to get on the voltage peak of the flyback compared to the source pulse voltage you give it. So I'd say having a very narrow diameter core section, maybe one welding rod or two or a couple of them, and then wind around that as many turns as you can, because having a smaller core diameter allows you more turns, and that will give you a higher voltage. So things like that, to consider when designing a coil. These coils here are not set in stone.
Over and over and over. But what you really want to do is you want to go as fast as you can without a capacitor, for the simple fact is you want to put a lot of this radiant energy to the source.
Having less core material, if you're not needing to spin a wheel, you don't really need the core. But you kind of want some core iron, because iron captures the flux that you're generating with that coil, and it does so very efficiently in a way that if you didn't have any iron, that flux would go right out the core air part of the core into the air, and you'd lose it unless you captured it with a wheel or some stator or some other way. You'd lose it. So if you're trying to create flyback and not generate a field so much that's going to radiate outwards, and you just want to make flyback and hold on to the flux you're generating and send it back into the core, the coil from the core as quick as possible, having less core material allows you to do that, because you have less iron and less carbon in that iron too, hopefully, so that the field collapses faster and into the coil that generated it to begin with. It collapses in reverse polarity. And of course, you have the high voltage diode capturing that field collapse of the flux, the inverted field collapse of the flux that was temporarily captured in that core. If you had a lot of core material, it might stick around longer in the core and not go back into the coil and out the diode like you wanted to. So yeah, having like one or two iron welding rods, like the ones Bedini uses, would probably be better for creating a quicker collapse of the field, because the field is being held not just in the coil, but it's also being held temporarily in the iron core and being transmitted to whatever coil that's wrapped around that core. If you have more than one coil, it would go to the second coil. In this case, we have one coil, so it goes back to the same coil, but in reverse polarity. And it's called back EMF, What's up, Crypto? Jean-Jacques? Yeah, it's a lot to think about. You can energize a coil without any iron, and your flux field generated will disperse into the environment. And if that's what you want to do, that works fine, because you could put another coil within the environment and pick it up. They use the iron to, generate the flux field or the magnetic flux from the coil receiving energy. It radiates, and the iron will pick that up very well and hold on to it until you turn off the power. And then the iron lets it go back into the coil. Or coils, plural, depending on how many coils you have wrapped around that piece of iron. So you can see how one can experiment with a piece of iron and a bunch of coils, or just a bunch of coils next to each other. You don't always need the iron. You could do wireless transmission with coreless coils from one coil to the next. Or you can do core transmission of magnetic field from one coil to the next using iron core. So in the Bedini system, he's not really, any radiation the coil gives off, he's trying to capture in the wheel motion, spinning the wheel. And he's also trying to capture it through the diode into the other battery. And he does use a core because the core helps capture that radiation and not leak it into the environment. I would think, Nonetheless, you can pulse a coil without a core. I'm pretty sure the peak voltage on the flyback won't be as great though, because iron does amplify. It does seem to, if it doesn't amplify the field, it sure does capture it very well and localize it into the iron. Just ranting here, my thoughts on on using voltage to run a magnetic wheel with magnets, and as your standard DC motor would do. Although your standard DC motor does not recycle the flyback, it does use commutators though, and it does use relays. So I don't know. Be nice to take a blender apart. These blenders are DC, and see what you could do, like recycling, just using a standard DC motor, hooking up to that coil there with the flyback diode, whichever diode you want to use. Anthony likes Schottky. I would happen to agree with him. Depends on how high the frequency is. But the flyback is really fast too, so having Schottky would be a better efficient, because it's a high-speed diode, Like they have high-speed capacitors too, high-frequency capacitors. So I would say, yeah, you want to open up a DC motor somewhere, like a small blender or a hair dryer or something that uses DC motor technology, and the drive coil winding on there, you could hook up, if it's in series, you would only need one diode, and you could at the very least, point that diode at an isolated car battery sitting on the floor next to the device, so that when you run it, it siphons off the back EMF into the battery, which would not only charge your battery, but it would also reduce the friction of that device, and it would be able to run a lot more efficiently, and you'd probably save power using that device now that you have the coil of that DC motor flying back into a battery as you're running it as intended with the device. What I'm saying is open it up, attach a diode to the coil in the reverse direction, one end of the coil. Assuming it's one coil, it has two ends. Put your diode in reverse, and on the end that's supposed to be the. You would see where the source power comes in DC. You'd see plus positive DC hit the coil at that point. You would attach absolutely nothing there. You just attach a wire to the coil at that point and run it to the negative of the battery that you want to charge, and at the other end of that same coil is where it's receiving a negative from the DC supply, and that side of that coil will become a positive after the switch opens on that DC pulse driven motor that you're modifying. So I am Hotep, I believe he did this with a small fan. But yeah, you can do this with the side that receives the negative from the DC supply will become a positive. So you would hook up your Schottky high voltage diode to that side of the coil where the negative from the supply is currently feeding that side of the coil. You hook the diode up facing away from the coil, pointing the anode away, and connecting it to the positive terminal of a battery of the same battery. Whereas the other side of that same coil, you just hook that to the negative side of the battery, and you run the device as intended.
What you really want to do is you want to go as fast as you can without a capacitor, for the simple fact is you want to put a lot of this radiant energy to the source.
Now that it's able to siphon off the flyback while it's running, where it was probably siphoning the flyback was being grounded out before. You might find that along your modification way of modifying the device, you might see one side of that coil hitting the ground. And now either they're connecting the negative to the ground or the positive. They're probably connecting the negative from the source to that drive of that DC motor. So the negative from the source to the side of the coil that receives that negative from source is probably connected to ground. And that's how they're throwing out the flyback. And they're hooking they're probably just throwing out the flyback somehow. You'd have to look into the device. Or not throwing it out at all and letting it sit and build up in the drive coil, which would cause that coil to heat up. So if you run your device for any length of time and it gets warm, chances are the device is not throwing out the flyback at all. The DC motor device. Got to be DC motor, not an AC motor. DC motor. Whatever the DC motor, if it's getting hot, they're probably not throwing out the flyback at all. It's building up in the coil, creating that heat. So you can attach the diode accordingly, and your battery, if you enter that coil to your battery, making sure your diode is facing the positive terminal of that battery so that that battery never feeds energy to that coil. And the energy is fed to that coil from the DC supply that has been taking the wall power and turning it to DC to run the device. That's how that coil gets energy. And it runs the device, and instead of heating up now, flyback is being emptied each pulse into your battery. And the heat's going into your battery instead. You see how that works? Well, it's not heat really, it's only heat because the coil has no room to store the energy. It has to wait for the magnet to come around again to use it. But the problem is that polarity is flipped, so it still can't use it. But yeah, it has to wait for the right moment to get it out of the coil into the spinning magnet rotor array. But it's hard to find that time because you're already, your commutator device is already feeding power. And when it's not feeding power, the DC motor, it's turned in such a way that the magnets on the rotor are not facing any drive coils. So there's no way for the energy to get out of the coil and to push the magnet, to repel, or whatever. Just can't get out. You have to put the diode on there. Flyback has to be converted before it's used for locomotion, in my opinion. You have to at least capture it into a solid state, chemical, non-corrosive battery type, and then use it from there to, create locomotion again. But my point is, all the locomotion we're creating now with DC motors These DC pulses are generating flyback signals. So is the AC pulse signal. It's just not a flyback signal per se. It's a back EMF. It's not exactly a flyback signal. It's like a flyback signal trying to form, but it never gets a chance because the AC signal just never really turns off. It either goes slightly positive, gradually positive, then gradually negative, and then below the negative, and gradually more negative, and then gradually less negative, and then above the negative, and gradually positive, and then gradually less positive. There's no really off cycle with AC. It's just the AC is constantly reversing polarity. So you could see how flyback would have a hard time getting out or even forming itself. All right, I'll shut up now. Thank you for watching, guys. Catch you later.